Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining today. My name is Hank Lee, Marketing Manager at SystemSoft Technologies. We are excited to be live today and hope you are looking forward to what I believe will be an insightful and engaging episode, Hyperautomation and the Human in the Loop. On behalf of SystemSoft Technologies and Automation Anywhere, thank you for taking the time to join this live event. As a reminder, you can submit questions at any time by posting them in the comments section. Now, I would like to introduce today's experts. We have SystemSoft Technologies Vice President of Intelligent Automation, Thomas Helfrich. We also have a special guest, Micah Smith, Director, Developer Evangelism at Automation Anywhere. We are really excited to have Micah and Thomas share their experience working on and leading a diverse range of client automation projects. Now, let's go ahead and hand it over to Thomas and Micah.
Thanks, Hank. Welcome, Micah. How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
It was nice. Hank, that was a great intro. The funky feel to it, I think, will almost match the topic. It won't be quite as cool as the topic of AI and RPA and keeping it humanized and whatever what that means. We'll explain here. But the topic we were continuing on was how do you humanize automation? It's really kind of the broad stroke of that. And one of the favorite questions I often get is, what's better, RPA or AI? And though I've answered, I know a few thousand times probably, Mike, why don't you give your take on what it means to kind of keep a human in the loop and what humanization of automation means?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's a really good question, and something that people ask quite a bit is, what is AI, what is RPA, and is there any intersection between the two? In the intro, I noticed that Hank introduced you as the VP of Intelligent Automation, and that's a phrase that gets thrown around a lot, as well as hyperautomation, right? And in my opinion, those phrases are kind of used synonymously to represent where we're using RPA, which is that automating of repetitive rule-based tasks, and merging that with the capabilities of machine learning and AI, where we're looking at data to try to basically replicate and simulate human-based decision-making based on massive amounts of data and training and things like that and models. So I look at intelligent automation or hyperautomation as that sweet spot where the two of those can combine, and that's where we're using bots, and the bots are able to leverage some of the capabilities of machine learning and artificial intelligence to make better decisions. And whether that's in intelligent document processing or whether that's in approving a mortgage loan, there's lots of opportunities for the two of those technologies to be used together. So what do you say? How do you answer that when people ask you such a question?
Well, it starts with the point of view that intelligent automation or AI systems, and RPA is part of this, and intelligent document processing is part of this. It starts with the point of view that these systems, these solutions, that when you combine them with process and people, have to enable the acceleration of a person and not the replacement of them. And for adaptability and democratization to happen, you have to keep humans in the loop. Otherwise, the fear of the robots are coming or becomes real, right? But it's not actually how these systems are implemented, right? So when, for example, if you talk about humanizing how you use AI and RPA and what's better, it's comparing an apple to a fork. They're both used in eating, but they're completely somewhat different. But sometimes used together, it's a pretty good experience. So I don't know, maybe don't use apples and forks. Probably pizza and fork. And I guess you can. I'll work on my analogies. It's not the point. The point is that you have to use these things in concert to improve not only what you're automating, but to allow humans to go faster, be smarter, and do probably more meaningful tasks. And that's generally, that's pretty much how I would answer most times. But it starts with that point of view. Use intelligent automation to accelerate people, not so much just to replace them. I mean, you see this all the time out there, like when people are starting a RPA or an intelligent automation journey of kind of how does it work in the system, and maybe you guys have done this a million times as well at Automation Anywhere, but talk to me about how you guys are using your human in the loop as part of the AI piece, and maybe just give a simple example. I mean, of where the AI fits. I think that'd be very important understanding what we mean by humanizing automation.
Yeah, so great points there, and I think that the first and most obvious use of AI within RPA and specifically within Automation Anywhere is the use of IQBot. And IQBot is Automation Anywhere's intelligent document processing solution, and it allows you to extract data from forms. And so if you've got an invoice, or if you've got purchase orders, or any kind of legal documents, or even custom forms, right? Just, I know that the data is going to be here, here, and here, and it might move around a little bit. But when we specifically think about like structured and semi-structured forms, that's really IQBot's sweet spot. And when we think about keeping a human in the loop there, when you're using IQBot, you have the ability for, hey, this one particular document didn't meet my confidence thresholds as far as extraction, or it didn't meet my validation rules. I need to send it to a human, and that human can then validate the data from that form to perfect and correct the results from that extraction. And specifically to IQBot, that's where the IQBot engine is starting to actually learn from that human correction, and so that it can do a better job of doing that extraction in the future. And what's really interesting about it is that when it's doing that kind of extraction, it's able to say like, hey, I want to extract the invoice number. But depending on the invoice, sometimes that's labeled as like invoice.no, sometimes it's actually invoice pound, sometimes it's invoice number, and it's all over the place in these different documents. And so through the engines that power IQBot, it's able to pretty much automatically detect those different variations where, hey, sometimes it's to the right, sometimes it's to the bottom, and sometimes it's actually in the bottom left corner of the form. It's able to find all of those versions of where the invoice number or whatever data it is actually located, and able to accurately extract that. The other point I wanted to touch on there is that Automation Anywhere has a product that is ARI, which stands for the Automation Anywhere Robotic Interface. And that's where we start to see a lot of humans in the loop as it relates to RPA processing, where, hey, I have a process that maybe starts with a little bit of a human component. The bot then kicks off, it does some research, it does some automation of some task, and then it comes back to the human and says, hey, this is what I got from my research, or this is where I'm at with that task. What do you want me to do next? And I think that that's really allowing organizations to, I would say, automate processes rather than automate tasks, right? It's one thing for me to automate a specific task, and maybe that's something that's kicked off by a schedule or by an email or something like that. But when I'm able to use humans and bots together, that's when I'm able to look at much greater processes and look at end-to-end process automation as opposed to just task automation that I think a lot of organizations kind of get stuck with, and they stall and they're like, hey, we're running out of stuff to automate, and it's because they've focused on the tasks, not the process.
Yeah, and as you automate and you're using AI to learn from fully automated, models versus the people in the loop, and this is not exclusive to RPA and anything else, but you always have to do things to reduce risk in your AI models, or in the leveraging of making decisions, and that comes from removing the noise, the bias, and normalizing somewhat your business decisioning, and making sure the AI is not building inequality and unfairness into its own model just based on the inputs. So maybe you talk about your technology a bit. If you could share kind of how you see that, does the technology enable it, or is it more of a governance on the company side to make sure that as decisions are being made at the human level, they're not subjective, right? They're objective and they're following a process. From your perspective, does the technology enabling that to be enforced better, or is it still kind of on the company to put the governance models in to train the models as they're executing? And this is specific to RPA. Oh, you're on mute there. Yes.
As a total cop-out, I think I'll say that that's both. And I know that sounds like I'm taking a high road here, but I think the reality is that with RPA, you have what a lot of people are starting to explore is the data exhaust that's coming off of my processes. So as I have a bot that's running, or as I have a task that's being automated, I'm generating a lot of that data exhaust, which is to say, my bot is dealing with stuff that it's extracting from applications. My bot is dealing with data that is now validated against other applications. And my bot is entering data into maybe even a third application, right? So as I'm going through and doing those transactions, I have a lot of data that is being used in that process. If I take the time to actually save and store that data, then I can look back to possibly see why my bot was making the decisions that it made. When we think about a human in the loop, I look at it the exact same way. when I'm presenting information to a human and they're making decisions based on that information, I can then retroactively look and see, okay, well, what were the criteria that they were presented with and what decision did they make? And when I'm able to kind of marry the two of those together, I can now see, well, based on the data and based on the model that I'm building, what were the criteria that my model determined were the most important in making this decision? And what does that look like for the human making that decision? And it may mean that my model needs to actually have some of that human bias trained out of it, where I'm de-emphasizing certain criteria that the human are using for their decision making. But I think all in all, it actually allows me to make better decisions in the future because I have this full audit history of what was the decision made, what was the data that led to that decision, and how can I, was that the correct decision? And how can I train this in the future so that my bots and my automations are making the correct decisions going forward?
And well, and I appreciate the response too, because I think it is somewhere in between of doing the right thing, training all the things that go with this. I want to take a moment. We had a question from viewers. Comment on OpenAI and the new AI feature GitHub Copilot. Now, I'm familiar with OpenAI a bit. I'm not familiar with this new feature. My assumption is it's probably some type of library, something we can go use for part of your AI modeling or decisioning. Mike, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it at all. I wanted to see if you had any knowledge on the topic of the question. My comment is I don't know enough about it to make a comment.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I have heard of OpenAI and I've read about that. I have not seen much with GitHub Copilot, so now I'm interested to go look at that though.
Yeah, I control my attention to be here, not to go start searching things on Google. If I look at some applications of where I think automation is, very applicable to keeping a human in the loop, and just we ease. I think the analogy I've used in the past was, we just got a black and white TV a few years ago, and now it's color. And is in terms of automation, and it's soon to become a very cool flat screen, and then fully, AR, VR, and off we go to this kind of piece. And where we are is still the state of the art, but it's still just turned color on the TV, right? So I think where we're looking in the future for where automation will be and how AI is leveraged with it, it's going to come fast, but it's got still a long way to go from being. I think it's still in the journey. It's not quite yet the full destination of how we use intelligent automation and process. And hence, when I think keeping humans in the loop is so important at this stage to make sure that we're creating systems that are actually going to be fair, and they're going to build up over time to really automate what needs to be done, so humans have time to kind of shift and have higher value to what they want to do and be happier, honestly, at work. So the areas that I think come most are banking and healthcare, in particular. I think in like credit decisioning, or in even care of service potentially of how you do that, or just in the kind of RCM cycles on healthcare. So from your perspective, have you seen where the first adopters are from your human in the loop technology?
Yeah, and I think you hit on a really big point there, is that when we keep humans in the loop, we have a facility in place to do that exception processing, right? We don't have to have our bots make the full end-to-end decision. And especially in situations where we've maybe used a machine learning model, we don't have a necessarily high confidence in the machine learning model's accuracy, or the machine learning model comes back and tells us, hey, I'm not terribly confident on either one of these decisions if it's a binary decision. That's where I think it's really important to keep a human in the loop. And that's where, like you mentioned, with credit decisioning, maybe mortgage, loan approval, things like that. That's where I think it is really important to say, hey, we're going to leverage what we can from a machine learning model that might be able to tell us whether this is a loan that should be approved or a credit that should be granted. But in the situations where we're not able to have a high accuracy on that decision, that's where I want to have a human in the loop, where I can have a human essentially make that final decision. And then I want to take the data, just like we talked about, that human used to make that decision and what decision the human made, to then retrain that into my model, so that the next time a similar loan or a similar credit application comes through, my model is able to make better decisions in the future. And so we still have that backstop of a human, and we're not totally keeping humans out of the process, but that we do have a way to invoke a human should we decide that that's appropriate.
And we're getting some more questions. This is great. Thanks for the, and I think you talked about it a little bit here. One was on the use of NLP and image classification and how you deal with a model that needs to be retrained. That certainly happens, and you certainly need to do that to make sure that it's aligned to an outcome. there's organizations out there that are dealing with trust and index, responsible.ai is for example. They're really dealing with the biasness, unfairness, and making sure that models from the get-go are kind of certified to not have that built into them. That'll depend on where you are in the world, where what was considered fair, your politics, there's a lot of things that go into that, but there is direction going to this. Another question around the pros and cons of this automation and cybersecurity. You almost need you need automation in cybersecurity because of the whack-a-mole nature of it, or you need to remove the ability for the threats to be even present. So removing the ability to even see data if you're in a database, things like that. But I want to get your take on that, maybe on when to retrain a model specific around maybe RPA and process, because I think this is where our expertise would lie to answer that question. And it's a great question. When have you seen a model need to be retrained, or what do you think from your experience, since you have a background in some of the image classification piece as well?
Yeah, so I mean, the things that I'm going to look at when I'm doing any type of classification type problem, right? And usually NLP is that type of problem. Same with an image classification. I'm trying to see what did the model tell me that the correct response was for this particular image or for the classification of this particular text, and how far is that different from the next best guess that the model is giving me, right? And so usually when building these kind of models, they're going to give you a confidence of like, hey, I'm 75% sure it's A, I'm 35, well, that wouldn't make sense. I'm 10% sure that it's B, right? So between the two of those, I'm going to look at what the difference is between those. I'm also going to look at having a human in the loop where we have those situations where I don't have a particular high confidence on what my model is doing. And in that way, I can try to retrain my model. And the process that I described earlier with like the loan modification or the loan approval, right? I've got a human in the loop. When the human makes a decision about that loan, or it could be the same with NLP or image classification, when the human is making a decision on that text or making a decision on that image, I want to take that data, I want to store it. I'm probably not going to retrain the model daily, but at least for the start, I'm going to try and retrain that model somewhat regularly to make sure that as we're learning, we're continuing to retrain that data back into the model, and that we should hopefully see accuracy increases in the model itself. So, again, it's going to depend on a lot of factors, like how long it takes to actually build your model, how much data you actually have. I did an example of this for our Imagine 2020 event. So shout out to that. If you want to go look at that, we did a full example of doing this exact thing with mortgage decision making. And I gave away all the code, and you can see how it works, and you can see how to retrain a model every single time the bot runs. That's way too far extreme. But I think if you're going to retrain it weekly, you're going to retrain it monthly, like on the weekend, on weird off hours, and then have someone validate it before putting it back into production. I think those are appropriate to start with. And again, that's going to really depend on how long it takes to train your model. And if it's a multi-day training, then you may not want to be training quite as frequently.
And so if we could tie it back to the original theme of the humanization and automation, is the models being retrained, though, they have to be towards an outcome. So there's a reason to do that. Like, why would they? Is it for more profitability? Is it like we're trying to be as fair as possible? Maybe, like I look at that. Maybe the original answer is, what's the outcome and what's the goal? And at some point, you do need, it might be super profitable model how it's being worked and used, but it's really unfair, or it's really doing not what it should be doing from kind of a social responsibility standpoint. So I think this is kind of goes back to the humanization. Like, you have to have kind of a governance model in place that keeps the human at the center of that, where they're like, what are we trying to do for people, and versus what are we trying to do to make money or other things. I mean, at a loss what else that would be, but usually those are the two drivers of, do we do good for people or do we make money? And not a whole lot in between sometimes when it comes to business with some companies. So I think the responsibility comes from setting that up from day one, just from, I think, a culture and a change management of how you leverage this type of powerful technology in the organization, well beyond RPA. But and I think, I'd ask you that, what other areas in maybe healthcare have you seen this type of in the loop as well?
I think definitely with exception processing to billing, and to even, I could see this applied with the suggestion of certain drugs or certain applications of different medical technologies on people, looking for those weird situations where there's an outlier to what we normally see for that data. Those are the top two that come to mind for me. The other question that comes to mind with this, and I'm going to pose this to you because I'm curious about it as well. But what have you seen with the human aspect for a lot of this? When you've implemented this kind of solutioning in organizations, what has that meant for the humans that are there, and how has their uptake on this been?
Oh, when in specific to RPA and intelligent document processing, I'd say from intelligent automation, kind of those core two texts, it's usually met initially with thinking that literally a Terminator is going to walk into the room. No matter, like literally, and my job's at risk. So there's a lot of risk in the implementation itself, because the messaging and the purpose and the intention of automating has not been shared correctly. What I often see is that that's not the case where jobs are lost. What happens is that you just de-risk the whole implementation model and initiative by keeping people and allowing people to just pure normal attrition to happen. And you have scale now and replacement with the technology trains, and then no one's really losing a job over it. They get to shift the investment to higher value activities and just allow the natural things to occur. You do see this sometimes, though, I think, where you see, people being replaced with kind of the dehumanization of when you're using automation is in repatriation of process when it was at a BPO, and people have lost jobs because the process has just been automated back on shore, so to speak. I've seen that a few times as well. I do believe that in any of these initiatives, as you start adding AI into it and you're trying to learn, you still need a bunch of good data, and you still need to make sure that data is clean. One problem that I'll tie it back to was when people are kind of skeptical of their job being lost, or they're worried that intelligent automation is, dangerous, or any of these, or AI, they don't give you all the data that you need to learn about a process or learn about the exceptions. So I think it's really important to use accelerators in automated process discovery and understanding what the activities are at a machine level, and less so, that at just the person explanation level, which is taking some of the humanization pieces out of the trust. But to really be able to do and build it correctly so you can enable people to go faster, you have to remove the noise of what's missing or the absence of knowledge. So what I've seen is when you use those hyperautomation tools to accelerate the development of this technology and implementation, it's way more effective for everybody involved, because it goes faster, it's more honest, and then people can actually, bend and shape their career or their position around that, as opposed to just guessing and then nothing really works. I mean, that's my long-winded answer to that. I think we have one more question. It's on the pros and cons of cybersecurity with automation. I think we touched on it a little bit. Cybersecurity is a beast of a problem, right? I mean, it's though I don't have an expertise in cybersecurity, I just know the volume of threats and attacks are so rapidly changing. If we're not using AI to battle AI, or automation to help execute and keep things up and running and safe and secure, I don't think you can win the battle. I think if we kind of think about that as maybe a future topic as well, of how you use cybersecurity and automation and AI, I think that would be a really good one to come back with. But what are your takes from this? What do you think kind of, if I'm going to call it a call to action, what are your actionable kind of insights or takeaways, do you think, Micah, from kind of our conversation today?
Sure. Yeah. So I want to comment on the cybersecurity thing, because I did have a friend that was actually doing this. There is a lot of application for specifically RPA, but also intelligent processing within cybersecurity. And I think it's probably not the thing you're asking about, but it's how it's actually being applied, which is to say that I've got a lot of friends who are working in this area. And part of what they're doing is they're on the dark web. They're trying to search through massive amounts of data. They're trying to determine if some of the leaked credit card numbers are attached to something that they have information about, or their financial institution. And so just gathering all of that data and then trying to validate some of it is a task that you could easily give to a bot. And that way it's able to do that automatically for you. It's not something you're doing manually. So even those kind of tasks of just sorting through massive amounts of data, sorting through forums, sorting through lots and lots of credit card details to be able to find those connections, I think is a task where you could see intelligent automation definitely at work. As far as the takeaways for me, I think that there's two big things I want to talk about that I think are important for organizations who are looking to implement any kind of intelligent automation. And the first is to protect people, not jobs, right? And so I think you kind of alluded to this earlier, but make sure that you're looking out for the individuals in your organization who are possibly displaced by some of these new tasks that are being automated, and give them the opportunities to upskill and side skill and learn a new role. Those individuals know quite a bit about your organization already, and so it's very likely that they're going to find a lot of value to another group within the organization. Not to mention being able to upskill or side skill even to help automate some of the tasks that they used to be responsible for. And I know that sounds kind of dark, but it's really the people know the processes the best. And if they can learn how to actually build bots or learn how to build these automations, they're able to run them on their own. And that gives them the opportunity to grow. Some of the research that was done by University of London asked people what they would do with their extra time if part of their work was actually automated. And roughly 80% of the people said that they would either pursue opportunities to learn a new skill, or they would experiment with new ideas and new tools that could help further their organization's goals. And so I would give people the opportunity to kind of explore that a bit more and give them, invest in those people so that they can, so they have the opportunity to upskill. The second thing I would say is definitely establish a COE. And Thomas hit on something like this earlier to talk about the governance of what you're doing with your machine learning models and your building. I think the governance and specifically a COE is really important, because a COE establishes some of these best practices for how we're going to do this, whatever this is within the organization, whether that's RPA, whether that's machine learning, whether that's a combination of the two. But it allows us to have one central place where that vision and that those practices are all put together. And the COE ultimately becomes a great place for individuals who are looking to side skill or upskill or make use of these RPA tools or make use of these machine learning models. And so establishing that allows you to really have like a guide path for your organization as it starts to look at intelligent automation to help out with your digital transformation goals. So those would be my two big takeaways for intelligent automation.
I would concur with that, and I'll extend and say that the RPA and intelligent automation programs I've seen be successful take that exact approach from a fundamental standpoint, which allows for the actual intelligent automation benefits to become real. Because when you set it up correctly, you get through the roughness of, what is this new thing? And then when that passes, you're now set up for success. And I want to thank you, by the way, Micah, very much today from it. I think that concludes our time. I know we have we have one more of these at least planned at least. I'll turn it back over to you, Hank. And thank you so much, everybody, for attending and the questions. And I look forward to hearing from you again soon. Hank?
Thank you so much, Thomas and Micah. That's some really great insight on, how humans interact and, as part of the optimization of automation in your organization. What I would like to do is just share with you our next event topic. So we're going to be coming back on air again on July 15th. And this will be our third episode in this series on intelligent automation. Episode 3 will focus on why your organization needs intelligent document processing and understanding the impact, of artificial intelligence that has on document processing. So we're really excited to have you here today. We thank you once again. Thanks, Thomas. Thanks, Micah, for your great insight. And we'll see you all in 2 weeks. Have a great day.